And if everybody would mute while Lindsey's presenting, that would be great. Here's Lindsey Varner from the Rokeby Museum, Director. Take it away, Lindsey.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. And I am Lindsey Varner. I'm the director of the Rokeby Museum. I've been here a little over a year now. And I am going to talk about a past exhibit. It just ended, but it's an important part of Rokeby's history. And this past season, my first seasonal exhibit at Rokeby was a modern artist, the commercial art of Rachael Robinson Elmer. And when I started at Rokeby at the end of September of 2020, we had been doing a project with an artist based in Montreal. It was intended to be an artist in residence program, but 2020 pretty much made a residency impossible. So Courtney Clinton, this artist, had decided that she would continue on with her residency and just do it virtually. And she really wanted to focus on Rachael Robinson's artwork. And she did a series of blog posts that are freely available on our website. People could go and look at them now and take her art course. But she was inspired by Rachael's early education, which was done through a correspondence art course. And she would write to an artist, Ernest Noft, and send over her drawings, and he would send back his criticism and his comments. And she would just we have this whole series of letters, all of which are in our collection. So Courtney took these letters and she recreated this correspondence course to create a modern drawing course through these blog posts. And it was such an incredible project, especially during COVID, as an engagement tool, but then also just a great way to highlight the amazing work of Rachael Robinson Elmer. So I was very inspired by this project, and we needed a seasonal exhibit for 2021. And I wanted to do something with Rachael. So she was she really became our seasonal exhibit, looking at specifically her commercial art. So for those not familiar with Rokeby, my colleague Tucker had given an overview of Rokeby and who we are during his talk. So I'll do a very quick introduction to who we are for anybody new to Rokeby Museum. We are a National Historic Landmark located in Ferrisburg, Vermont. The farm is on 90 acres, all of which was a portion of the original over 800 acres that were part of the Robinson farm going back to 1793. We have a series of historic outbuildings which are on the National Register, and we have a modern education center which houses our exhibit Free and Safe, the Underground Railroad in Vermont, as well as a rotating seasonal exhibit space downstairs as soon as you walk into the building. We also have 50 acres of maintained trails. Our red trail is an interpretive trail that talks about how the landscape has changed since the Robinsons farmed the site. In particular, it looks at how we went from a farm to the forest that you would walk through on these trails. One of my favorite things about the trails is we have the descendants of many of the apple and pear trees that once made up the orchard on that site. So it's a beautiful place to walk in the spring and summer. And then we have our blue trail, which is a little bit more of a wilder trail, but you can get a couple of miles of beautiful walking just on the Rokeby site. Rokeby was initially settled by this gentleman here, Thomas Robinson. Thomas came to Vermont from Newport, Rhode Island in 1791. He purchases the Rokeby in 1793 from the Dakin family, and he begins to expand the farm fairly quickly. He was one of the first individuals in Vermont to import merino sheep. All right, are you seeing the PowerPoint?
We're seeing the original slide with the commercial. There we go. Okay, now, so we would have been seeing other, there we go, okay.
Yep, so about the museum, and now you should be seeing Thomas.
Yes.
All right, I think we have it now. Sorry about that. So yes, this is Thomas Robinson, now that you can see who he is. So as I said, Thomas Robinson settles here in 1793. And he is the first to import merino sheep. and expands on the property in 1815. So when you come to Rokeby today and you come up the driveway, you see this very typical Vermont, 19th century Vermont farmhouse. That was the addition that the Thomas Robinson had put on. And it's very much a highlight of the increased wealth that you start to see within the Robinson family during this period. Our National Historic Landmark status comes from our second generation of Robinsons, Roland and Rachael Robinson, as well as their good friend Anne King, who was living here from about 1820 onwards. And they were radical abolitionists. They believed in immediate emancipation. And they were well-known abolitionists known across the country, working with individuals like William Lloyd Garrison, who was the editor of The Liberator. They invited Frederick Douglass to Ferrisburgh to speak, and as part of the 100 Convention tour in 1843. And they were very well known, including using the site as a stop on the Underground Railroad. And the letters within our collection, we are able to trace a whole series of freedom seekers who came to Rokeby on the Underground Railroad, which makes us one of the best documented Underground Railroad sites in the nation. Roland and Rachael have several children. I'm not going to speak about all of them, but I want to introduce you to Roland and Anna, because they are the parents of Rachael Robinson Elmer. Roland and Anna marry and come back to Rokeby to help to run the farm. Roland is working in New York City for a time as a young man. He is learning to do publishing, and he is an illustrator during his early career. A lot of his work is kind of cartoonish. He does some commentary. He also does some very beautiful scenery of farm life. He publishes his drawings in a whole series of publications, including what today is Field and Stream, Rod and Gun. He has a degenerative eye disease and slowly starts to go blind. And because he can't do his drawings anymore, he starts to turn to writing and writes a whole series of very popular books in the 19th century that focus on Vermont life and community. Some of these books are written in the Vermont dialect and are studied today by linguists. And his wife, Anna, helps to edit these books before sending them off to the publishers. Anna was also a very gifted artist. And between the two of them, they really encouraged their children to study art and really help to cultivate their interests. They had 3 children. Rachael is the one in the center. She is the eldest. Then you have Roland. He's at the bottom with his wife, Elizabeth. And at the very top is Mary Robinson, who's the youngest. Both Mary and Rachael become very gifted artists. Our exhibit focused solely on Rachael's work because that is the majority of what we have in the collection, but we do hold quite a few of Mary's artwork as well. Mary was incredibly gifted at naturalist art, and she liked to draw flowers and trees, and actually went for a while to Washington, D.C., and was doing plant identification books for a period of time. And she very much took after her mother, who also did a lot of nature painting and drawings as well. Rachael was born in 1878, and she dies in 1919 during the flu pandemic. She's born here at Rokeby, and the majority of her early education is here through her mother for the most part. She begins her correspondence course when she is only a young teenager. And this correspondence course really starts to build on this growing artistic talent that her parents identified very early on. They really encouraged creativity within the kids. Anna created picture books for her children, and I have a picture here of one. It says Little Rachael's Picture Book, 1880. So she would have been just a couple of years old when she gave this to her daughter. And these picture books are incredible pieces of Robinson material culture. They are essentially made from old scraps of clothing. It's the outside of this particular book is a brown silk, inside it is linen. And she has pasted in clippings from newspapers and journals and magazines, and they are anything you could possibly imagine. She has clipped and pasted into these books, and we have several of them into the collection. Rachael's father also created her own little sketchbook as a child, and we have within Rowland's sketchbooks a number of sketches of him and Rachael as a very young child. So they begin to see Rachael's talent growing from a very early age, and they're very influential in helping her to start to develop her artistic abilities. In the 1890s, she begins working with Ernest Noft. Noft is running the correspondence course, and Rachael's mother, Anna, enrolls her in this course. Noft is a very well-known art critic and teacher, and he is essentially creating this course that you pay a subscription to. And you would, it was all done through letters. You would send your artwork to him. He would send back his feedback. And everything was being funneled through Rachael's mother. She was a very young girl, and he could often be very harsh in his criticism. So she was funneling everything to Rachael as it was coming into Rokeby. But one of the most incredible things is that we have all of these in the collection. And within our the Rokeby collection as a whole, we have approximately 15,000 letters. And each of those have been broken down by the family members. And within the collection for Rachael's mother, Anna, and also a little bit within Rachael's collection, we can actually start to piece together these pieces of artwork with Noft's commentary on it to the letter that corresponds with them. So one of my favorites, and this was one that if you go to the blog post on the website that Courtney Clinton talks about quite a bit, what a discovery it was for her to match this drawing with the letters and to be able to know exactly what the A, C, B, D, what all of these actually meant. And I have a quote here from that letter that indicates, that these are indicating whether it's shadows or lines. And I think one of the things that really struck with me when Courtney was reading through this letter, she had said it reminded her so much of today when you take an art course. The commentary and the comments that Noft was giving back to Rachael were almost mirrored exactly things that she would have heard from a professor when she was in class. So it's incredible to think that we could discover and piece these things together today. With Rachael's father's eyesight starting to fail, very early on, he began asking her to help develop some of the book covers and sketches inside of his novels. And we have a lot of the drafts that became the final pieces of some of these book covers. So I have the Sam Lovell's Camps here, one of the more complete sketches that we have for the final cover of the book. She also did the inside cover image of Rowland Evans Robinson, of her father, that would be placed inside the book plate for this particular book. And you see it republished in a number of other of his books as well. So this was her kind of early introduction to the publishing world. And you can see through the letters between Rowland Evans Robinson and Rachael that he is often giving her advice on working in the publishing world as she starts to think about, is this going to be a career for herself, or is this just something that she does as a hobby that she really or that she enjoys to do but isn't going to make a career out of it. It starts to become clear that Rachael is pretty serious about her art. She attends Goddard College, at the time Goddard Seminary, and she begins to advertise to teach art classes to other people. And she then later enrolls in 1899 at the Art Students League in New York. This is an incredibly prestigious school even today. And she enters in as a student who's both learning from a fine arts tradition, but many of the students, particularly the young women we're starting to learn, went into the commercial art sphere. And they begin to work in publishing houses doing, in particular, children's books illustrations, which is one of the directions that Rachael takes. One of the things that I find about our collection here at Rokeby that's absolutely incredible is this ability to pair things. And I have the picture of our plaster head and the sketch that goes with it. And all through the creation of this exhibit, I was constantly looking for ways that we can pair together and really get a better understanding of her creative process, and in particular, her learning process. And we have multiple sketches of her practicing this plaster head and the shadowing in particular with this plaster head. The Art Students League has a very heavy influence on her career. It is close to many of the publishing houses. She's learning this fine art technique. But it seems that she knows that she's going to be going into the commercial world. So what we find is within a lot of her sketches, they are very much fine art in the form of commercial artwork. And again, this is probably one of my favorite finds in the exhibit. Again, piecing together all of these things. This is almost serendipitous. I was going through a folder and we found a whole series of letters that were uncatalogued letters that hadn't been put with the 15,000 letters that we have. And there was one letter with no date, or I should say no year. It says March 23rd. But we know that given the time that Rachael was enrolled and that she's writing to her father, who dies in 1900, that this is likely her first year. This letter is coming from the Art Students League in 1899, the first year that she was enrolled there. And I was reading the letter, and there's a fantastic quote that I pulled out for the exhibit that says, "Mr. Cox gave me the same criticism as last time, too fat, round, and wobbly. I know what to work for now, strength and simplicity." And I found that quote just incredible. And I wondered, what did the artwork look like? And later that afternoon, I was going through boxes of artwork, trying to select things for the exhibit. And lo and behold, I pull out a box, and buried at the very bottom with artwork that there was probably 60 different pieces of artwork in this box, is this sketch. And written in tiny letters, it says soft, round, and wobbly. And this would have been done by Kenyon Cox, who was one of her instructors. And in one of the letters, Rachael says what would happen at the Art Students League is they would go to class, they would be instructed, especially with their life drawing class, which is what this was from, they would do their artwork, and then they would take it to another room and it would be placed on display, and the instructors would go around and write notes on it. And so you can almost imagine Rachael completing this, taking it in for observation, and coming to it and seeing this soft, round, and wobbly written on it, and knowing what she needs to work for. So it was a beautiful pairing of this piece of art with this incredible letter that was uncatalogued in our collection. So it was almost like a new find for the museum as well. And what we find is when Rachael leaves the Art Students League, she really begins to build this career around publishing artwork in a whole series of books. And she builds a relationship with Harper and Brothers. And we see a series of book plates as well as illustrations coming out through Harper Brothers Publishing. And what I absolutely love about this quote is it gives you a sense of how she really sees her career. Our business is to become better in every sense of the word, and better as in human beings. And art is only to be regarded as an estimable aid in making us so. She really lived through this world of art. And it's amazing to see within our collections just how much drawing meant to her, just on a kind of daily basis. It was a career, but it was also something that you get the impression that she couldn't not do. every little scrap of paper that she owned, notebooks just filled with sketchings. You can tell in some of them that she would be flipping through a magazine and see something that she really liked. And rather than clip it and paste it in a scrapbook like you see with some other people during the period, she would sketch it and then would write the issue that she found this particular thing interesting. I really feel like, having looked at all of Rachael's artwork over the past year, that it wouldn't have been possible for her to not draw. It was just such an important part of herself. What Rachael is best known for are her series of postcards published in 1914 that were these incredible views of New York, published by Volland Company, based out of Chicago. And these were this incredibly new phenomenon in the United States of creating postcards, and particularly for tourists, but also just for sending short notes. I had no idea that this was a thing, but this was considered the golden age of postcards. And Rachael was one of the first to really capture New York City in a very imaginative way. And her postcards became wildly popular. They're held by the Library of Congress today. And so we get these very beautiful sketches on very fine tracing paper sometimes. And coupled with them are the final published view, such as here, the Youth Companion published a story called When Priscilla Was Little, and Rachael created the character Priscilla. My absolute favorite is from a book by Caroline Hoffman called A Princess Finds a Playmate. So this was published in 1918. And we have boxes and boxes of Rachael's sketchbooks. And going through these sketchbooks, I started to realize that some of these were very familiar looking. And Rachael began to test out different costumes. And through these sketchbooks, we can trace the evolution of the final imagery in many of her published works. So my favorite is the soldier from A Princess Finds a Playmate, because you can see how she's playing with, is he going to hold a sword? Is he going to have a gun with a bayonet? How is his cloak going to look? There's an entire page where she's just playing with the folds of the cloak and what it's going to look like. And one of the things that's really neat is nothing that you see in Rachael's illustrations are like an actual character or individual of the period. Her costuming is completely unique and original, and you can see her playing with this throughout her sketchbooks. The color of the costumes, the buttons, the sashes, they're all reminiscent of a soldier during this period, but they're also completely imaginative. And one thing we learned while putting the exhibit together is this was one way that our artists during the period could distinguish themselves. This early 20th century period is considered the golden age of illustrations. And if you look at some of these illustrations, they almost all look the same. The way that the colors are used, the style, they're very similar. But the way artists could actually distinguish themselves was through costuming. And we know that Rachael was developing her own costuming style. Some artists during this period actually created vast costuming collections. Instead, Rachael was sketching. I had mentioned she would go through journals and or magazines, and she'd see a hat that she would like or a dress, and she would sketch it out and then start to manipulate it and change it. And you would see it later on in one of her illustrations. And so she was starting to distinguish herself through her costuming. And after she passes away, a tribute by one of her friends and fellow illustrators, Faye Barnum, actually notes this. In particular, she was asked to illustrate John Bunyan's dream story, so a new edition of Pilgrim's Progress. And she notes when commenting on Rachael's style that in the more imaginative works, there was a gaiety, a lightness of touch, and a humor that makes grown-ups as well as children delight in fairy tales. And she goes on to say in this tribute to her that her costuming was completely unique in her own, and that in particular in the Pilgrim's Progress, it really distinguished her because it was unlike any costuming that you would see out of a Pilgrim's Progress publication during the period. And there were a lot. Pilgrim's Progress was being republished over and over again in the early 20th century. But she chose a very different way to costume the characters that would distinguish her as the artist. Along with doing some of the commercial artwork for publications in children's books and novels, she was also creating cards for her friends. She created a card to help with the recovery effort after World War I, in particular planting trees in war-torn France. And we'd see her entering into a series of competitions. This image in the center that says "The light never fails" was part of a contest to become the next poster image for the MetLife company. I'm not sure if this was an image, but there was another competition where it sounds like they were describing the poster that Rachael had put forward and how innovative it was. And it was meant for a convention on electricity. And they didn't like it because the building at the top had a spark very similar to this one, and they didn't want people to associate electricity with sparks. So as much as they liked it, she was not the one who won that competition. But it's, again, she's creating these very innovative and different views of New York City. And you see some of her themes reused, such as in this 13th convention of the General Federations of Women's Clubs. You can see that her skylines are very similar. And this particular postcard is very reminiscent of her first set of postcards that she did, the Art Lovers New York series, where she's reusing a lot of the skyline. But especially with this being 2 years after the initial set of postcards was published, you start to see her change in style. It's a little bit more abstract and blocky. It definitely is the skyline for New York City, and you can see the steamboats, but you start to see the Art Deco artistic aesthetic beginning to creep into her artwork at this point. And in 1916, she decides that she is going to publish her own set of postcards. And she creates a series of images from New York. And we have the original painting. In the center is the final postcard and the poster for advertising these. What I love about these postcards is that they are quintessential Rachael. She did not work with the publisher. She did these all on her own, from the creation to the creating the linoleum block cuts, to the printing, to the cutting, design. All of it was her. She did the marketing for selling them. They are completely done through her own creativity, and she's not having any outside input on which views they're going to use or if they want to change the colors. And what I love about these sets is you do start to see the evolution of her artwork. That very first set of postcards are almost like paintings. They're these beautiful pieces of fine art. And you begin to see by 1916 this change in her art, moving towards this more Art Deco phase of her career. You see this in some of her published works, but these postcards really give you a feel for where her art was starting to go towards the middle of the 19 teens. So sadly, Rachael passes away in 1919. Between 1918 and 1919, approximately 675,000 people died during the flu pandemic. And Rachael is one of those, passing away from the flu in 1919. And in the exhibit, we really asked, what if? seeing her artwork evolve as it did over the course of her career, from the ink and line drawings of her early education to the fine artwork at the Art Students League, to those final set of postcards and this beautiful early Art Deco type of work. We ask, where would her artwork have gone? And also, would she have been better known had she lived? A lot of illustrators during this period that are known tend to have been male. But as you start to look through many of the records of publishing houses during the period, the vast majority of people who are being paid for illustrations are women. You also start to notice that as you go through many of these books, you often don't have the illustrators listed in the books, as you would today, where you have author and illustrator. Sometimes we're piecing together, we'll find an illustration in our collection, and we have to hunt down where it might have been published because Rachael is not listed as the illustrator. So it also makes us wonder how much more was published that we just don't know about because she's not listed as the publisher. So there's lots of questions as to where her career could have gone had she not passed away in the flu pandemic. Her commercial artwork really just scratches the surface of what we have in our collection. I had mentioned that I really believe that Rachael artwork was just a part of who she was. She could, I don't think she could not be drawing. But we have oil paintings, we have pastels, we have shelf fungus with her sketches on it. We have so much work in the collection. And we were very, very fortunate as a museum that when she passes away, her husband, Robert, we believe, gave it all back to the family. And very early on, her brother, Rowland, and his wife, Elizabeth, are exhibiting her artwork along with their father's artwork all across Vermont. So they keep her memory alive, and they are saving all of these things. So we are incredibly lucky to have the collection that we do. And it is a very rare collection. To be able to trace the very first sketchings all the way through to the final product, even having the comments from the publisher and then her drafts again, all of that is within the collection here at Rokeby. So we are incredibly lucky to have this work here. So if you'd like to visit the museum, we are currently closed but open by appointment. We're open 7 days a week, May through October from 10 to 5. And our seasonal exhibits are constantly changing. As I said, Rachael's exhibit has gone down, but if you come into the house for a tour, whenever we are open to the public, we do have a room where we do talk about Rachael's artwork, and some of it is on display for people to look at. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that people have.
Excuse me. Where would you rank you're not an art critic, but where would you rank her with her contemporaries at that period of time? Was she the most, the least, the best? That's probably a bad question, but
yeah, it's kind of difficult to say. And to be honest, I asked a very similar question to our artist in residence, Courtney Clinton, because she had spent a lot more time studying Rachael. And she had basically said, female artists during the period, and in particular commercial artists, were not seen as desirable as fine male artists during the period. And in the US in the early 20th century, you're having this major shift where New York in particular is trying to become the center of the art world, whereas Paris is still holding on as the center of the art world. And Rachael is she's taking part in all of these artistic changes that are happening during the period. She goes to Paris for a trip, and she is studying some of the masters, and she comes back and you can see that she is honing in some of her fine art skills, but she is a commercial artist, and that it is very much in a way looked down upon it as a career in that sense. today she's not really remembered as a commercial artist. And part of that we think is because she died so young. She's 40 years old when she dies. And you have a lot of female artists who are her contemporaries that live to old age. And you start to see more of an appreciation for commercial artists as fine artists, but not until the 1950s really does that appreciation start to grow. So Courtney and I have had these long conversations about where Rachael fits in with this. And she's very much this kind of quintessential example of this underappreciation of illustrators during this period.
Is she living in New York City during this time? Did she die in New York City?
She does. She's in New York City. Her husband is working in New York. They are living in an apartment together. The theory is that she probably picked up the flu from returning soldiers. They had hosted a dinner, and several returning soldiers were at that dinner, and they believe that she probably got sick from them.
Who was he? Who was her husband?
So her husband was Robert Elmer. They had met through a mutual friend. They married here at Rokeby, and for a while they were living in New York with his mother, and then they moved into their own apartments. He did kind of banking. He was a jack of all trades, but he very much supported her career. There's a fantastic letter between Rachael and her mother where Rachael would often get very quick deadlines. She would get a letter from Harper Brothers that would say, "We have this book coming out. We need a horse. Can you quickly sketch us a horse?" And Robert would be very supportive. In this letter, Rachael writes to her mom and says, Robert's been doing all the cooking and the cleaning so that I could get this sketch done for quick publication. He really wanted her to succeed in this career.
Any other questions? I keep asking questions all day here.
It's just so fortunate that you really have the complete picture, not the same picture, but the complete record from the beginning through the final product. Now, were the postcards signed, or would people recognize her style?
Yeah, so the postcards did have, like they would say, created by Rachael Robinson Elmer on them. And then the second set definitely did. And even some of her illustrations, if you go through books, her name will be in it. And she did create her own signature. So it was the double R. And so those initials would be kind of hidden in some of her drawings. And after she married, you'd see this RRE. And those are an indication and a way for her to put her name on her illustrations. I've also seen some where in the draft of her illustration, she has her name in it, but then in the final publication, it's been very conveniently cut off at the bottom. So it just depends on who's publishing it. And we do have some books that are published that do very clearly have her name on it. One of Caroline Hoffman's last books, it does list Rachael on the cover as the illustrator.
So in the art world, if something surfaced, those in the know would likely realize who it was, or with some research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she has a very distinct signature. You can tell when it's hers. And there are lots of Robinsons, and a lot of them use that double R. Even her father would use the double R for his signature. It was a family trait. Part of it, and we use it as our logo here at Rokeby. But it goes back to the original sheep stamp that first generation Thomas had used, that double R with the T in the middle. And the family just continued using some variation of that because they just all named their children the same thing, so you could do it. But you see other Robinsons around. Not all of them are related to our Robinsons, or they're distantly related, but they also will do that double R sometimes. But Rachael's signature is very distinct.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is commercial art still what it was in the early 1900s? Do people still make a living with commercial art?
They do, yeah. Yeah, it tends to be, it gears a little bit more towards design work now. It's much more digital, and I think there's more of an appreciation for the fine artwork behind it. part of our exhibit had an entire panel that just discussed this tradition of fine art versus commercial artwork. And today we can look back on this work and it is certainly fine artwork. But at the time there were very clear distinctions, and she was seen as a commercial artist, which was almost lesser than a fine artist.
Yeah. Was there, did the family, the story of the early Robinsons with abolition, did she identify with that, or was that totally not part of her life?
Yeah, it wasn't really part of that last generation's life. The one thing, and this is one of the benefits of the Robinsons, is they recognize their legacy. And Rachel's mother, Anna, in particular, knew that the family had an important legacy. And the fourth generation, Rachael and her sister and her brother, that was kind of ingrained into them. And that's why we have as much as we do here at Rokeby. There's an awareness that the work that the second generation and even the first generation, what they did in terms of agriculture and bringing merino sheep in and the abolitionist work, that it was important historically. And initially they had set up a lot of the cataloging and the memorial association that preceded Rokeby Museum was really to honor Rachel's father, Rowland Evans Robinson. So our original name at the museum was the Rowland Evans Robinson Memorial Association. And they set this up in the 1930s to honor his works as this beloved Vermont author who was known nationally. But the benefit of that is they turned their legacy into a mini museum that they could market to tourists well before the museum was actually created.
Thank you very much, Lindsey. This has been, excuse me, my voice has gone completely, but thank you. This has been wonderful.
It's been my pleasure.
So we'll see you in January.
I think Tucker is going to do the January one.
Okay, great. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.